This is a tale from China, and it's called The Great Bell of Peking. Now, in the days when the land of Qin became one nation, Qinha as it was called, the first emperor decided to make his capital in the city of Peking because it was a large city, it was a walled city, and to secure it completely, he commanded that at the center of town they build a great tower so that his soldiers could be up in the top and see in all directions. And in this tower, he wanted installed a great drum and a great bell. Now, making a large drum like this was not really anything unusual, but casting a bell of that size was something that had never been tried before. And so they called upon a master metalsmith who lived in Peking. His name was Chen Ha. Master Chen came before the emperor, and when he heard what the emperor wanted, he nodded and says, "Yes, your majesty, I will try, but something of this size, a man could stand inside of easily. I have never attempted anything that large, and I don't think anyone else has either." And the emperor said, "Well, if anyone can do it, you can. You must try." And so materials were gathered together, and there in the city square, there was an erection of lumber, and a great structure was built, and in it was an enormous crucible, and wagons came in with coal and with sand and with ingots of bronze and clay to make a mold. And at last, when everything was prepared, they lit up the fire, and many, many ingots of bronze was put into the great crucible. 4 men worked the bellows to enhance the flame, and when it was ready to pour into the mold, another dozen men on great levers tilted the crucible over so it would pour into the mold. Once the pouring had been done, other men misted the outside of the now very hot mold to cool it down. And after a little while, the mold was broken open, and it was discovered that the bell had 2 enormous cracks, one down each side. It was useless. Word of this was brought to the emperor, and the emperor nodded and said, "Very well, I knew this would be a difficult task. Tell him to try again." So, repeat process. He made a new mold. He remelted the bronze. He added a few additional compounds to the mixture to make it a little less likely to fracture. And it was stirred, and it was heated, and the 4 men worked the great bellows, and a dozen men worked the poles, and they poured the molten bronze into this enormous mold. And it was cooled, and it was broken open. This time there were no cracks. However, the entire outside of the bell was pockmarked with tiny holes. Again, useless. Again, the emperor was informed of this. And at this point, the emperor was losing his patience somewhat. And he said, "Tell Master Chen this. He may try one more time to make my bell for me. If he succeeds, he will be well rewarded. If he fails, I shall have his head." And this was conveyed to Master Chen. And that evening, sitting at home, now Master Chen was a widower, but he did have a young daughter. And when the daughter heard of this, she was most alarmed, because after all, in the land of Qin, a child's most honored duty is to care for one's parents. And she beseeched her father, saying, "Let us pack up our goods and move far away, far from where the emperor can find us. I don't want to lose you." And Master Chen said, "Daughter, I have given my word to the emperor. I must try this. If I succeed, I will be rewarded. If I fail, I will pay the price. It is the way of things. You may not speak to me of this again." And so Master Chen went back to work, and the daughter sat at home thinking to herself, is there any possible way that I could help my father succeed in this task? And she thought, and eventually a thought occurred to her. She had heard of a man who lived in the city, reputed to be a master magician, a seer, a sorcerer. Perhaps this man would have some way to assist, some magic that might make the project succeed. And so she gathered up what few coins she had saved from the household, and she made her way across the town, and after asking directions several times, she finally reached, against the far city wall, this nondescript small building, and as she approached it, the door swung open, seemingly of its own accord. And this voice said, "My Lin, do enter. You have been expected." And my Lin, the daughter, entered through the door, and it was a dim building with shelves filled with all sorts of odd jars and ointments and things she did not recognize. And there was a single table on which was a single candle, behind which sat an old bearded man. And she bowed to him and said, "Greetings, grandfather, but I am most confused. To my knowledge, we have never met. We have never even seen each other. How is it possible you know my name?" And the old man just smiled and said, "In my line of work, I come to know many things. I know who you are. I know why you have come. And before you speak, let me give you this one piece of advice free of charge. I know the question you are about to ask me. My advice is, take your coins, go home, do not ask. Because if you do, I shall be obliged to answer you. And you may not like the answer I give you." But my Lin was determined to help her father, so she took out her coins and laid it on the table and said, "Tell me, how can I help my father succeed in his task?" And the old man sighed, and he finally said, "My Lin, there's only one way that your father can be made to succeed. There is one more element that must be added to the mixture to make it whole. And that element is the blood and bone of a child of his own house. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" And Marlin thought quietly for a moment and finally nodded and says, "Yes, I understand." And so she went home. She spoke of this to no one. A few days later came the final day that the final attempt to cast the bell would be made, and a great crowd had gathered in the square. The emperor himself was in attendance, there upon a riser that had been built for him, attended by members of his court, and to his right hand stood the royal executioner, just in case his services may be wanted. And now the men worked the bellows, and other men stirred the molten metal, and the 12 men began to tip over the great crucible. And just as they began, everyone there heard a voice. And when they looked up, there on the very top of the scaffolding stood my Lin. And she called out to those in the crowd, "Father, I do this for you." And before anyone could move, she dove headfirst into the molten metal. And when she struck, there was a great tower of flame and smoke that rose up, and the smell of burning flesh spread across the square. Master Chen was so shocked by this that he fainted dead away and had to be carried The same fate fell upon a number of those in the crowd. But for those who remained, there were many who swore that as the metal was poured, there were brilliant streaks of red and white mixed in amongst the bronze. So time passed, and it cooled. Eventually it was broken open, and the bell was perfect. It shone smoothly, almost as if with its own inner light. And the emperor nodded in pleasure, and soldiers cleared everyone away from the square, and a wagon was brought in. And they carefully lifted the bell onto the wagon. They escorted it through the streets. And when they got to the base of the tower, other men with ropes and tackle lifted the bell up the side of the tower, swung it carefully into place, fastened it well, and that evening, just as the sun set, the great bell was struck for the first time. And when it was struck, the sound that came out of it was beautiful to hear. It was clear, and it was loud, and it was a great thing of beauty. But then something most unexpected happened. For as that first tone faded away, there was a second tone that rose out of the bell. And this tone was also loud and clear and unmistakable as the dying scream of a young girl. The next day, Master Chen appeared for the emperor, and he was given his reward of jade and jewels. And on that same day, he closed up his shop and announced his retirement. He loaded up his goods, and he left the city and moved far, far across to the very edges of the empire, where he bought a small farm, and he settled down and spent the rest of his days living in quiet seclusion. For he knew that had he remained within the city, he would have slowly been driven to madness. For each time that bell was struck, then and to this very day, each time all who hear it hear those same two sounds as they issue forth, one following the other, from the great bell of Peking.